So the talk today is on, a changing climate. So we have a changing climate. Rising seas, one of the conditions of a changing climate, and the human institutions that we have, our human institutions and how they respond to a changing climate. And how those are really sort of strange bedfellows. And the way that I set this up is in a series of questions. So I'm going to explore a little bit of my research, and I'll get to that at the end. But I have a question here, or a query, and we can all ask these questions of ourselves. And the question is what I would do versus what I will do. And often we can understand that sometimes these questions are contextual. For example, you can say that, look, I would do this, and I'd be happy to do this if somebody asked you to do something. But you might not be so willing to actually do that thing under certain circumstances. And I think that's what I'm getting at today. I'm getting at the difference between what humans think are good ideas and what they're actually willing to do to accomplish those good ideas. That's kind of the area of research that I'm in. It is interdisciplinary by nature, but in regards to climate change, it has some specific applications. For example, if you saw a problem, would you fix it? How many people would fix a problem if they saw one? We're problem solvers here. I hope everybody here is a problem solver, right? We use our minds to solve problems, right? Would you do something today to prevent harm tomorrow? Would you take action today to prevent harm tomorrow? Sounds like it's the right thing to do, doesn't it? At least on its face, superficially. Yeah, I probably would, but I know what you're saying. There's a big but at the end of all of your answer, right? I would, but, or there's some conditions to this, sure. And then, would you use relevant information in making an important decision? Would everybody here want relevant information in making their decisions? Better than irrelevant information, right? So yeah, these are no-brainers, I know. Let's think about these questions in terms of climate change as a problem, as an issue. A few things, a few characteristics of climate change. Climate change we know occurs over time, right? It's not all happening today. Everybody understands that, right? All the climate change that ever will occur will not occur today, right? It's a dynamic thing that occurs over time. And climate change also creates an uncertain future. The difficulty with climate change is because it's dynamic, has anybody ever heard of the disclaimer? Usually brokers, if anybody's invested in the market, right? Past performance is no indicator of future performance. Has anybody ever heard that before, right? So, and climate change is very much like that in the sense that we can't necessarily look at the past as an extremely strong indicator of what the future will be. And then finally, the harm. It's shared by everybody. It used to be, when I first started studying this stuff, well over a decade ago, Hummers, which aren't even made anymore, but does everybody know what a Hummer is? These big super trucks, right? Back in the early 2000s, they were very popular, turn of the millennium, very popular trucks. And I used to think to myself, by the way, it was the Hummer versus the Prius. The Prius was in its first generation. It was relatively a new thing, a hybrid vehicle. Now we have electric vehicles. The idea was you have a gas guzzling machine on one side, and you have this highly efficient machine on the other side. And just, they really look different from one another. And the issue is, the person who drives the Hummer, if they're helping to contribute to climate change, if we understand the science and we understand that greenhouse gases, and particularly anthropogenic human-induced movement of greenhouse gases, is a major cause of climate change. The person who drives the Hummer, the difficulty with climate change is they do not individually incur all of the costs of driving the Hummer themselves, right? They get all of the benefit of driving the Hummer, which means they're really high off the ground. They have no problem going around in snow like this, right? This is not an issue for them. They can pretty much go wherever they want, whenever they want, and they can intimidate the heck out of you. They can take up 3 parking spaces. They get all of the benefits of driving a Hummer, but they don't incur any of the cost vis-a-vis climate change, right? The cost is spread out amongst everybody. Now that is a difficult characteristic of climate change. And that's what I mean by the harm is shared by everyone, right? We all share in the harm. The costs are shared, but free riding, an economic term, free riding is possible. The IPCC is a bunch of really intelligent scientists, right, from all around the world that have been working for decades on trying to understand the causal relationships between human actions and climate change. And they've been doing this for a long time, thousands of studies, thousands of reports, and they all culminate every once in a while, every few years, in these sort of assessments, these clear assessments. The most recent one, this is what it says. that humans, not that the climate is changing, that's a given, but that humans are changing the climate. We are a substantial factor in changing the climate. It's the truth. The empirical evidence is there, and it's really unquestionable. Think about it as the 95th to the 99% confidence level. It's as sure as you want to be in the world of science, right? When we can't predict the future and we have to look at the past, it's about as positive as you can be. And this just shows the annual average temperature changes. This is sea level rise over time in the past century. This is the actual empirical data. These are the causes. Most of it is fossil fuels. From the human side, most of it is fossil fuel use. And when you look at fossil fuels, the sources of those emissions, a lot of it comes from the energy sector. So I deal in policy, and if you wanted to think of low-hanging fruits for reducing, energy sector would definitely be a low-hanging fruit if we could change the way we produce our energy. It's a big-ticket item. What does that mean? It means that projections for climate change are not so great, particularly vis-a-vis sea level rise. And the reason I bring that up is because we live along a coastal area. Most of us here, we study in the coastal area, but we're just not any type of coastal area. We're glacial till. We're a kind of coastal area that couldn't get any closer to the water, to sea level, right? We're extremely low-lying coastal area, okay? So sea level rise will have a disproportionate effect on places like us, like where we live. Beyond that, some of the impacts of the climate change, food and water shortages, that's not a great thing. One of the amazing inventions of human ingenuity is the ability to settle down in one place, stop hunter-gathering, right, and start producing agriculture, start planting. And then another amazing ingenuity was when we could actually fix nitrogen, create fertilizer, right? Amazing human attributes. Food and water shortages, that's a serious issue because right now we have a food distribution problem, right? We have plenty of food, we just don't distribute it. And same thing with water, by the way. But the idea of a shortage, that's significant with 7+ billion people. Increased poverty, obviously not a goal of global economics. Increased displacement of people and coastal flooding, of course. Serious issues, really honestly serious issues to contemplate. The highly technical summary of all of that is this. Everybody needs to buy a snorkel. And I thank Dr. Goodman, my colleague from the Department of Public Policy, he actually gave me that illustration. I thought it was great. So there's the egghead scientists, and that's their conclusion, buy a snorkel, okay? So obviously there's other solutions to that, right? So let's look at the climate change problem in a context, and specifically, by the snorkel, sea level rise, something that I study particularly. There's a few insights that I'd like to summarize quickly. We as humans, when we think about how our human institutions respond to information, something like climate change, particularly sea level rise, our history really matters, particularly in this area. What I mean by that is, that's Boston. So that's, in the white, that's what Boston originally, that's its original landmass. That's Boston without human interaction. Has anybody been to Back Bay? Prudential Center, right? Oh, beautiful, right? The best public library. Back Bay is called Back Bay because guess what it used to be? It used to be a bay, right? Before we filled it, right? This is all land reclamation. I don't want to belabor the point, but the idea is Back Bay, South Cove, Great Cove, Mill Pond. These are not high bluff areas. You go up to Maine. I was in Bar Harbor. Has anybody been to Bar Harbor, Maine? Walk around, it's beautiful, isn't it? Nice granite and shale coastal bluffs, right, for 30 to 50 feet. In other words, you can go to the edge and look really far down and see the ocean. I gave a talk up there in October, and I was giving a talk about sea level rise and some of the issues that certain coastal areas are experiencing. And I told them, don't worry, it was at College of the Atlantic, if anybody's ever been there. I said, you don't have anything to worry about. I went to the edge where and I looked and I said, no, you're okay. You can get 20, 30 feet and you're fine, right? But we're not. Boston's not fine with 20 or 30 feet, obviously, right? And this is one of the reasons why. Because we decided to come over from Europe, right? When I say we, Western European type folks, right? When we settled this area, we came over and we were coastal. We hit the coastline and we decided to develop the coastline. But Boston's extremely low-lying, and a lot of it is based on fill, right? That's as low-lying as you can get. We need to understand that history. Why? Because if I look over to the right, this is Carson Beach in Boston. Anybody know Carson Beach? A few people? It's beautiful. It's a beautiful area, right? It's a nice recreational area. I want to show you where the water met the land in Carson Beach in 1893. That's where the water used to meet the land. So Carson Beach is all fill, right? But it's not just Carson Beach. Look all around Carson Beach. Look at all of the development, all of the infrastructure. That is a huge commitment of human resources. How likely is it that we as humans are simply going to say, if sea level continues to rise, how likely is it that we're going to throw up our hands and say what? Forget about it, we're going to walk away? What's the likelihood of that? Pretty much zero or negative, right? We're going to stay and defend all of this investment as much as we can, right? Governor Christie, after Superstorm Sandy, right after it happened, we will rebuild. That is something about human nature that you should hold on to. We will conquer this. We will beat this, okay? There's huge infrastructure. The point is the history matters. I'm sorry. Our historical choices influence our choices today. Here's another example, Marshfield. Does anybody know why they call it Marshfield? Waka waka, right? Okay, so you have ocean. You have some development that runs parallel to the ocean, and behind that, what do you have? Like if those houses needed to retreat, where would they go?
Into the sea.
They'd go into marshland, right? Well, they'd go into a salt marsh, right? So, why does that exist? Well, here's another historical precedent. The purple line I just highlighted here, that's where the sea met the land in 1848. The blue line, 1954. We had negative sea level rise between 1848 and 1954. How did that happen? How did the water move further out to the ocean? What do you think happened, ladies and gentlemen, between the 1800s and the 1900s? What did we do? Yeah, we filled, right? We filled the area. And why did we fill it? To build all of these nice houses. That's why we filled it. Why? Because probably after World War II, there was flight from the city, right? Or there was the sprawl, right? A lot of suburbia developing. So what a great area, what a great opportunity. And if I look at this from a development standpoint, I'm a developer. I go to this land and I see that the ocean is over there. You know, it's over there. I say, yeah, I can develop here. You want to know where the ocean is today? It's the red line. That's where the water meets the land today. Is it a good idea to develop there now? Do you think somebody would go there and say, here's the water, I'm going to build a house here? Does that make sense to any of us? What I would do versus what I should do? You want to know what that looks like today? That was our February storm. That's Marshfield in our February storm. All of the sand, all of the light sand has been removed through wave action. So guess what gets left? These large rocks, and they're hurled by the storm surge like cannonballs. I mean, that's like a war zone. And look at the house. This is the backyard. These are the houses that run right along that you're seeing. That's Marshfield. Who wants to live there? But people live there, right? People pay a premium to live there. I want you to hold on to that. This is Scituate, Massachusetts, right next to Marshfield. One of the graduates in our program is the climate change coordinator for the town of Scituate. I believe they are the first climate change coordinator ever to be hired in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, possibly in the nation, for any municipality. It's an awesome position. We need more of them. But Scituate has a climate change coordinator. Guess why? Because they're saying, help. Help me. Because would you build there? Would you buy the house under those conditions? Probably no, right? She calls me constantly and tells me, hey, we just had another high tide, not a storm event, a high tide event, and guess what happened with the waves? They went over the houses, right? This is Scituate during the storm. There's a seawall there. That seawall, if you can make it out, you can see some of the seawall's to protect against the waves. How's it doing? Right? Its intention was to protect, but not so good. This is Scituate inland after flooding from our most recent February superstorm, our storm event, our major storm event, early February of this year. Who wants to live in that house? Nobody, right? I mean, look at that. You walk outside and your car's underwater. Salt water behind you, right? And there's nice ice flows, and you can't get your mail, or you have to use your canoe to get your mail. I mean, this is serious. I mean, really. I was upset because there was a lot of snow that I had to shovel. Imagine if you experienced this, right? Walking outside your house. And this is today. This is a month ago. So our history really matters. We have a lot of built up infrastructure in this area. We own that infrastructure, and it's hard for us to make decisions about how to do something. In other words, if Boston was uninhabited today, if Scituate was uninhabited, if Marshfield was uninhabited, I think our decision would be easier, right? We're just not going to build. Pretty easy. But it is inhabited. Insight number 2, perceptions matter. I bet everybody has a really good feeling when they see this, right? Pretty much? I do. Like, this is awesome. I want to be there now. Look outside. Can you see outside? Look outside here. Think of the past 4 weeks, what we've been through, temperature-wise, snow accumulation, and then look at this and ask yourself, which one would you choose? In our mind's eye, this is interesting to me. Now, I have no strong sort of empirical data to go on here, but there's a few things I want to point out. There's something about this scene that is pleasing and aesthetic to us, and I know this indirectly through a few things. If I take that same house and I move it inland, like a half of a mile, the exact same house, with the exact same landmass around it, which one do you think costs more?
The one near the ocean.
The one near the ocean.
Yeah.
It definitely costs more. My question is why? The view. We're willing to pay a premium for the view, right? Another way of saying that might be, this is what we see in our mind's eye when we see that house. Awesome, party, wonderful, recreation, enjoyment, right? Aesthetics, view, beautiful, salt air, right? Cooler in the summer than the humidity, right? It helps us a little bit. We might see this in our mind's eye. We probably don't see that, right? That's probably not what we see. In other words, if we saw the picture on top, would we put a premium on the value of that house sitting along the shoreline? Would we be willing to pay more for that house? What if we saw coastal properties more like this? Have you ever thought of a coastal property more like a volcano? How many people think volcanoes are safe? We grew up knowing volcanoes are not safe, right? Don't worry, that volcano is inactive. Okay, I'm gonna build my house on top of it, right? Who builds their houses next to volcanoes, right? Nobody builds their houses at the top of volcanoes, right? But we know recently in Hawaii, people do build houses close to volcanoes, not right on top of them, but within proximity, and that's even very dangerous, right? Because sometimes the volcanoes erupt, sometimes they flow magma, and sometimes it makes its way to your house. It's extremely dangerous, right? I mean, it literally is dangerous. The third insight is that incentives matter. History matters, perceptions matter, incentives matter. Let's look at incentives from a few different perspectives. The public. In public policy research, the field that I work in, there's a few presumptions that we have about the public. The public's disinterested, okay? It's hard to get the public to focus on something. They're generally disinterested. They focus on today. The average person focuses on today. I care more about today than I do tomorrow. Public likes to capture benefits. Tax refunds are awesome, aren't they? I notice H&R Block, TurboTax, you name it, right? They all talk about getting money in your pocket, right? That's their marketing scheme. Why aren't they saying, well, we do a really good job filing your taxes, which is really what they're doing. They tell you, no, we can get you money because that entices you. That makes sense to you. Why? Because public likes to capture benefits. Give me something individually. And, believe it or not, if we can, we like to free ride. We like to externalize costs where we can, instead of internalizing them. In climate change, this is the difficulty when we think about the perception from the public, or incentives from the public perspective. In climate change, we ask people to be aware, be very aware of things, disinterested public to be aware, care about the future rather than focus on today, and sacrifice. Don't worry about capturing benefits for yourself, worry about the future, worry about others beyond yourself. That's really what we ask. Why do we ask that? Because of the conditions, of the factors, of the characteristics of climate change. It occurs over time, it's uncertain, and the benefits are shared. So that's the public. So let's use that, let's think about that, and let's ask ourselves, what do politicians think about the public? Here are our politicians, here's the public. How do you think politicians perceive the public? What do you think politicians think about when they think about us?
Like herds.
Like
herds?
Like herds?
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that you're disinterested, that you care about today, that you love to capture benefits, and that you like to externalize costs. If politicians know these things about us, we have to ask ourselves, how are they going to act on our behalf? What's going to be important to them? What's going to drive them? There's a wonderful study done by Healy and Malhotra in 2009, and it showed a couple of things. One of the things it showed fundamentally through a metadata analysis is that we get a way better return on investment when we spend our public tax dollars on preparing for disaster, on spending money to prepare for disasters, rather than responding to disasters. What I mean by responding to disasters, flood insurance, federal disaster relief, these things ring a bell to you? The federal government comes in with money after a disaster, $50 billion for Hurricane Sandy and federal disaster relief, $50 billion. To do what, by the way? What do you think that did? Rebuild where?
Same place.
Marshfield goes under, $50 billion, and put it back together again, 3 inches away from the ocean. Does that make sense to you?
No.
But why do we do it? Why is that the thing we do? You know why? Because the disaster relief, we have to spend $15.36 of federal dollars, of our money, taxpayer dollars, to get $1 of benefit. But that's what we choose to do. And Healy and Malhotra looked at voting patterns, and what they found out is that politicians respond to the voting preferences. The public rewards the politician with votes when the politicians give disaster relief money. But when politicians do the right thing by doing disaster preparedness, no reward in terms of votes. So if the public tells politicians, hey, this is the right thing to do, but I'm only going to reward you if you do disaster relief, what do you think politicians are going to do? Yeah, we don't spend much money on disaster preparedness, by the way. Definitely not $50 billion. So you wait for a disaster to act even when it is way more expensive. Politicians do something that we would not expect them to do. As a matter of fact, most of us would sit here and say, I would never vote for somebody that would waste my tax dollar money like that. Sure, but you do. We all do. And government, the perspective from government's standpoint. And the way that I formulate government here is through the policy-making process. Some of you might be familiar with it, some of you might not. But policy-making climate change. If we think of climate change from this perspective where you go through a cycle, and I understand I can't take the time to really explain it. I explained it a little bit better in the YouTube video if you're interested. But you identify a problem. There is no problem with identifying climate change as a problem. There's no issue there. Zero. It's a no-brainer. Public, politicians, all the polling suggests that the public, climate change is an issue. It's a top priority from the public's perspective. So identifying that as a problem, not a big deal. Setting an agenda, not really a difficult thing too. That's what do we do about this problem. Developing some proposals about what to do about the problem, really not an issue either. Building support. This is the problem. Why we don't take immediate action on climate change, why we're not doing more today from a government standpoint is because we have a logjam here at building support. And I would argue to you that that logjam is defined by an uninterested public that thinks about today, loves to capture benefits, disaster relief. Is there a better way to capture benefits? You're going to give me $200,000 because my house went kaput? Wonderful. And externalizing costs. As far as building support, this creates somewhat of a logjam that prevents us from having what the next step is, enact law or rule, which means that we never get to meaningful legislation on climate change. Make sense? We just don't get there. But I think that this is the sticking point. And since we don't get there, a lot of the sort of rhetoric that comes around about what we're not doing and why environmental groups, why we should be doing more is because, hey, we announce a target, we make no plans, we do nothing, and we fail. That's the policy-making process from the rhetoric of environmentalists in terms of climate change. So the result is, government gives us reasons to discount new facts, previous policy directions. We are programmed to discount new facts like climate change. We're just not, as humans, programmed to understand really well how to think about the future and make investments today about the future, especially when it hurts us today. I can explain that in detail, by the way, but and politicians have no strong reason to make us act differently. We're not telling politicians clearly what we want. So what I would do versus what I will do, if you saw a problem, would you fix it? That's the first, these are the questions I ask. Here's the answer. Only if it affects me today. Only if it affects me like right now. Would you do something today to prevent harm tomorrow? Only if there are immediate rewards for me. If I can accumulate those rewards. And would you use relevant information in making an important decision? Maybe if the information fits my worldview. No if it doesn't. So that sounds like a problem. So what do we do about that? We look at the policymaking process and we focus on this area of building support. We have to overcome our history. We have to make better decisions. We can't be held back by our historical decisions, what we've done in the past. We can't. We can't afford to. Because you know it's going to cost $5 billion to create that wall out in the Hudson, in the Bay, to protect New York City. And it won't protect New York City, probably not, right? But we'll throw money at it, right? So we need to overcome our history. Our history cannot define how we act today. We need to alter our perceptions. What I mean by that is, maybe, instead of viewing this as that, maybe we see it more like this. In some areas, not everywhere. And see incentives differently. So instead of focusing so much on today, we focus a little bit more on tomorrow, right? And there's great proof that we can do this. People invest in their retirement all the time. The trick is to convince them it's an immediate reward, right? There's great research done on this. In other words, by not taking some of your pay that you get today to use, putting it away, it's an immediate reward for you, even though you can't use the money. That sounds weird, right? But we can trick ourselves into believing that to be true. So we have the capacity to think more about tomorrow, and that is absolutely necessary if we're going to do something about climate change. So that's probably more than 20 minutes, but enough for now. Thank you so much.